They say Donald Trump answers to no one, but what if that wasn't entirely true? One family, one quiet, ultra-rich American dynasty, allegedly helped shape his rise and influence his every move. Their name rarely makes headlines, but their money and political reach stretch deeper than most can imagine. Before revealing who they are, we'll explore the richest families in America, the ones who own not just companies, but influence, networks, and sometimes even presidents. Let's begin with the empire built on cleaning products, family secrecy, and global power. 15. The S.C. Johnson family. The story begins in Racine, Wisconsin. What started in 1886 as a small wax company exploded into a household empire under the name S.C. Johnson & Son, now one of the most trusted consumer goods dynasties in the world. Products like Windex, Glade, Raid and Ziploc became essential parts of American life. But while most people know their brands, almost no one knows the family. The Johnsons are worth over $38 billion, and they've kept their empire 100% family-owned. A rare move in a world obsessed with going public. That decision wasn't just about control. It was about keeping power concentrated, private, and protected from outsiders. Fifth-generation CEO H. Fisk Johnson runs the company today, but it's the family trust that really holds the keys. Their board is hand-picked, their assets are global. Their money stretches from Asia to Africa, backing everything from real estate to renewable energy projects that never bear their name. But their influence goes far beyond cleaning products. The Johnsons are tied deep into climate policy, conservation deals, and international government partnerships. They're known for huge philanthropic gifts, like $150 million to Cornell University, but critics argue that these donations also buy loyalty and access in places that matter. They've held private meetings with US presidents and even funded secretive research into corporate influence and environmental lobbying. Few scandals have ever touched them, and that's exactly how they like it. For a family controlling one of the world's most recognized consumer empires, they've mastered the art of wealth without spotlight and power without noise. But the next family on this list wasn't so quiet. They built their fortune on explosives, ruled the chemical world, and stirred some of the most controversial corporate legacies in American history. 14. The DuPont family. The DuPonts didn't just make money, they manufactured power, literally. In 1702, Eleuthère Irénée Dupont started producing gunpowder along the Brandywine River in Delaware. That business evolved into a chemical empire so dominant that by the 20th century, the DuPont company controlled America's war machine, infrastructure, and even daily consumer life. For decades, it was said the DuPonts had their hands in everything from toothpaste to nuclear weapons. At their peak, the family's holdings made up more than 1% of the entire US GDP, and they sat on what many called the First American Dynasty. The DuPonts built mansions, private schools, secretive trusts, and think tanks. Several members held government positions, advised presidents, and shaped US industrial policy during wartime. Some of the most advanced military technology in World War II had DuPont fingerprints all over it. But the influence came with darkness. In the 80s and 90s, scandals hit hard. Legal battles, tragic deaths, and the infamous John E. DuPont murder case brought unwanted attention to a family that once felt untouchable. Even as DuPont, the company, merged and evolved, the family's wealth fragmented, but never disappeared. Today, the DuPonts still control tens of billions in assets, scattered across investment firms, energy holdings, and philanthropic foundations that rarely mention their last name. They proved one chilling lesson: the family that controls your weapons might eventually control everything else. But the next family didn't build weapons, they built banks, and they used them to buy quiet influence over entire industries. 13. The Mellon family. The Mellons made their fortune the old-fashioned way, by owning the vaults everyone else depended on. In the late 1800s, Thomas Mellon founded Mellon Bank in Pittsburgh. His descendants, Andrew W. Mellon especially, would go on to become one of the most powerful financial families in US history. Andrew served as Secretary of the Treasury for 3 presidents, and his influence helped shape modern capitalism. By the early 20th century, the Mellons had bankrolled Gulf Oil, Alcoa, Westinghouse, and General Motors. Through a web of banks, private trusts, and holding companies, the family quietly amassed control over critical sectors of American industry. At one point, they were behind nearly 20% of the US industrial output, but you'd never know it from their public image. Their grip wasn't just economic, it was political. They were major GOP donors, architects of tax policy, and silent funders behind lobbying efforts that protected generational wealth and deregulated finance. Even Carnegie Mellon University, now a global tech powerhouse, owes much of its origin and growth to Mellon endowments and board control. Though modern Mellons are more scattered, their influence is far from gone. The family's investment arms still manage billions, and their connections run deep in conservative think tanks, energy lobbying, and institutional banking. The Mellons didn't just build wealth, they built the playing field. But the next family took a different route. They made their billions in beauty, then used that wealth to infiltrate diplomacy, culture, and political fundraising circles at the highest levels. 12th, the Lauder family. It started with Estée Lauder and a few face creams in the 1940s. By the time her grandchildren took over, the family had built a global cosmetics empire that now commands over $80 billion in market value. But behind the mascara, mirrors, and moisturizers lies a web of influence that extends far beyond the beauty industry. The Lauder family is a rare mix of luxury, legacy, and diplomacy. Ronald Lauder, Estée's son, became US ambassador to Austria under President Reagan and later became one of the most influential voices in Jewish international affairs. His network includes prime ministers, presidents, and CEOs, all cultivated under the veil of philanthropy and international diplomacy. The company itself owns more than 25 prestige brands, including MAC, Clinique, Tom Ford Beauty, Jo Malone, and Aveda. But the real story is what the family does with its earnings. The Lauders are known for bankrolling elite political campaigns, hosting fundraisers attended by US presidents and foreign dignitaries, and sitting on the boards of major cultural institutions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the World Jewish Congress. Estée's descendants are now part of the East Coast donor elite, moving between Park Avenue, Palm Beach, and Davos with ease. Their money isn't loud, their power doesn't need to be. It shows up in policy shifts, art deals, and the rooms where major global decisions are shaped. And while the Lauders may be fluent in diplomacy, the next family operates through something far more intoxicating: alcohol, legacy, and a name that once defined American celebration. 11. The Bush family. Few names are more American than Budweiser, and no family was more responsible for that than the Bush dynasty. Their story began in the mid-1800s, when Adolphus Busch helped transform beer from a local product into a national symbol. Over the next century, the Busch family built Anheuser-Busch into the largest brewing company in the US, with a reach so wide it touched nearly every fridge in America. But behind the red cans and Super Bowl commercials was a family empire laced with power, politics, and personal battles. By the time August Busch III took control in the late 1970s, the family was worth billions. He ran the company like a military unit, discipline, image, and total dominance in the marketplace. The company didn't just sell beer, it defined culture, bought stadium naming rights, funded political campaigns, and influenced everything from advertising laws to agricultural subsidies. Yet the family's legacy wasn't without turbulence. Infighting, tragedy, and scandals threatened the name repeatedly. The most public blow came in 2008, when Anheuser-Busch was sold to Belgian conglomerate InBev for $52 billion, ending over 150 years of family control. To some, it was a loss of American pride. To others, it was a calculated exit by a family that had already cemented its wealth. Today, the Bushes still live lavishly, estates, private jets, horse farms. But they're no longer just beer barons. They've turned their attention to real estate, private investment, and political influence, especially in Missouri and the Midwest, where their name still opens every door. But while the Bushes once dominated America's bar scene, the next family tried something even more audacious. They set out to control the price of silver and nearly collapsed the global economy in the process. 10. The Hunts. In Texas, oil isn't a business, it's a legacy. And no family built a legacy quite like the Hunts. Led by the fearsome and ambitious H.L. Hunt, a former poker player who struck oil in the 1930s, the Hunt family built one of the largest private fortunes in American history. At their peak, the Hunts were worth well over $16 billion. But it wasn't just oil that made them infamous. In the late 1970s, two of H.L.'s sons, Nelson Bunker Hunt and William Herbert Hunt, hatched a plan that would make financial history. They began buying up silver on the open market, quietly and aggressively, eventually controlling 1/3 of the world's silver supply. The price of silver skyrocketed. For a moment, the Hunt brothers were sitting on billions, and the financial world was on edge. Then it all came crashing down. In 1980, the US government changed margin rules, and the silver market collapsed overnight. The Hunts lost over $1 billion in days. It became known as Silver Thursday, a financial disaster that triggered investigations, lawsuits, and forced asset liquidations. Their ambition nearly broke the market. But the story didn't end there. Despite the scandal, the broader Hunt family held on to vast wealth. They diversified into oil, real estate, ranching, and private equity. Today, Ray Lee Hunt, one of H.L.'s sons, still controls a fortune worth billions, with deep political ties to Republican power brokers and energy lobbyists in Washington. The Hunts didn't just play the oil game, they tried to bend the world economy. But the next family built their empire through something far more stable: hotels, political donations, and a calculated grip on the American Midwest. 9. The Pritzker family. The Pritzkers are masters of controlled wealth. Originating in Chicago, this Jewish-American dynasty built its name through the Hyatt Hotels Corporation, launched in the 1950s by J. Pritzker. But the hotel chain was just the beginning. Behind the scenes, the family built a complex web of trusts, holding companies, and private investments that allowed them to protect their fortune from taxes and prying eyes. At their peak, the Pritzkers managed over $30 billion across dozens of entities. They weren't loud about their wealth. They were smart, quiet, surgical, and incredibly effective. But wealth was only part of the strategy. The family also went deep into Democratic politics. Penny Pritzker became U.S. Secretary of Commerce under President Obama and was one of his top campaign bundlers. J.B. Pritzker, another heir, is now governor of Illinois, wielding direct political power in one of America's most important swing regions. The Pritzkers are also known for massive donations to universities, hospitals, and the arts. Their name is carved into buildings across the country. But behind the philanthropy is a shrewd understanding of influence. Their money shapes policy, education, and culture, all while expanding their reach. This family doesn't chase headlines, they write the playbook, but the next name on this list has rewritten the rules of political money itself. An empire built not just to profit, but to reshape the entire American political landscape from the shadows. 8. The Koch family. If there's a single family that has defined modern conservative power in America, it's the Kochs. Their name isn't always on the ballot, but their money has shaped who gets there, what they stand for, and how policy gets made behind closed doors. The story begins with Fred C. Koch, who made his fortune in oil refining technology during the 1930s. But it was his sons, Charles and David Koch, who turned the company, Koch Industries, into a colossal industrial empire. Today, Koch Industries is one of the largest privately held companies in the world, generating over $125 billion annually, spanning energy, chemicals, ranching, paper products, finance, and data analytics. But the real power of the Koch family lies in what they did with their money. Over the past 4 decades, the Kochs have funneled hundreds of millions of dollars into political organizations, think tanks, super PACs, and lobbying efforts. They helped launch and fund groups like Americans for Prosperity and played a major role in influencing tax policy, environmental regulation, union rights, and healthcare legislation. Their vast donor network, sometimes called the Kochtopus, has been one of the most effective political machines in modern American history. And yet, they've done it while avoiding the spotlight. The Kochs prefer power without publicity, leveraging influence through back channels rather than bold headlines. Even after the death of David Koch in 2019, Charles Koch continues to steer both the business and its political legacy. They've been called kingmakers, disruptors, even puppet masters. But whatever label you use, one thing is clear. The Kochs didn't just play the political game, they rewrote it. But if the Kochs control the game, the next family owns the field, and their fortune dwarfs nearly everyone else on this list. 7. The Walton family. The Walton family is quite simply the richest family in America, and their fortune comes from one thing: Walmart. What started as a single discount store in Bentonville, Arkansas, became the largest retailer on earth. Sam Walton founded Walmart in 1962 with a simple idea: sell more for less, and his children turned that vision into a multi-generational wealth machine. Today, the Waltons are worth a combined $250 billion. Let that sink in. Their fortune is greater than the bottom 40% of Americans combined. They earn millions of dollars per hour, not per week, not per day, per hour, just from Walmart dividends alone. But this isn't just about money, it's about control. The Waltons still hold over 50% of Walmart's stock, giving them massive voting power in one of the most influential companies on the planet. Walmart isn't just a retailer, it's a global supply chain giant, a logistics empire, and a labor force manager that touches millions of lives every day. Decisions made in a private Walton family boardroom ripple across economies, job markets, and even politics. And while they keep a relatively low profile, the family has quietly expanded their influence through education reform initiatives, real estate and philanthropy via the Walton Family Foundation. But critics argue their donations come with strings attached, often pushing charter school agendas or deregulation strategies that align with their business interests. They don't run for office, they don't sit on TV panels, but their reach is undeniable. The Waltons are a reminder that true power doesn't need to shout, it just needs to keep selling. But while the Waltons perfected retail dominance, the next family mastered something even more global and much, much sweeter. 6. The Mars family. The Mars family is America's most deliciously secretive dynasty. They own a company responsible for the candy, snacks, and pet food found in nearly every American home. And yet, most people wouldn't recognize a single Mars heir if they walked by on the street. It all started with Frank Mars in 1911, selling hand-dipped chocolates from his kitchen. A few decades later, the company launched Milky Way, Snickers, and eventually M&M's, products that would turn Mars Inc. into one of the largest privately held corporations in the world. Today, the company also owns Pedigree, Whiskas, Royal Canin, Orbit, Altoids, and Ben's Original. Their reach isn't just in snacks, but in pet care, food science, and even veterinary hospitals. With annual revenue over $45 billion, the Mars family controls a massive consumer empire. And they do it all in near total silence. The company is still 100% family-owned, and Mars heirs are notoriously media-shy. They rarely give interviews, avoid public appearances, and keep internal business operations completely private. But don't mistake their silence for weakness. The Mars family ranks consistently among the top 5 wealthiest families in America, with a combined net worth over $100 billion. And they're incredibly strategic. They've used trusts, cross-generational wealth management, and discrete acquisitions to preserve their fortune for over a century. This isn't a flashy empire, it's a fortress built on familiarity and routine. Every time someone buys a Twix, feeds a pet, or pops a gum, the Mars family gets paid. But the next family doesn't operate in secret. They've built the largest private company in the world, and they don't answer to shareholders, regulators, or even public scrutiny. 5. The Cargill-Macmillan family. If wealth was measured by secrecy, the Cargill-Macmillan family would be the undisputed rulers. They own Cargill Inc., the largest privately held company in the United States, a global food and agriculture powerhouse responsible for feeding over a quarter of the world's population. While the public rarely hears their name, this family operates in the shadows of global commerce, quietly shaping the food supply, commodity markets, and international trade. Founded in 1865, Cargill began as a single grain storage business in Iowa. It grew into a behemoth that now trades in everything from corn, wheat and soybeans, to beef, chocolate, steel, and even risk management. Today, the company generates over $165 billion annually, more than the GDP of many nations. And it's still 88% family-owned, split among roughly 100 heirs from the Cargill and Macmillan bloodlines. The family doesn't just own the supply chain, they are the supply chain. Cargill has its own ships, its own rail cars, its own ports. It controls factories, fields, processing plants, and export terminals across more than 70 countries. It influences how food is grown, sold, and priced in every corner of the globe. From supermarket meat to fast food oil, from livestock feed to industrial chocolate, chances are something you ate today passed through Cargill's hands. But their power is nearly impossible to trace. They don't sit for interviews, they don't host flashy galas, and they certainly don't run for office. This is generational wealth on lockdown, protected by trust structures, legal firewalls, and an ironclad corporate culture built around privacy. Critics have raised alarms about the family's influence over food prices, trade policy, and even deforestation. But the Cargill Macmillans never respond publicly. They don't need to. Their power isn't measured in headlines, it's measured in global supply chains, and yet even their reach feels familiar compared to the next dynasty, the one that turned media into a throne and built a narrative machine that still echoes through American culture. 4. The Hearst family. The Hearst family didn't just accumulate wealth, they built an empire out of information itself. It all began with William Randolph Hearst, the larger-than-life newspaper magnate who practically invented sensationalist journalism. At one point in the early 20th century, he owned nearly 30 newspapers, 13 magazines, radio stations, and movie companies, all pushing the Hearst version of the American story. Today, the family still controls Hearst Communications, a media juggernaut that owns stakes in everything from ESPN and A&E to magazines like Cosmopolitan, Elle, Harper's Bazaar, and Men's Health. The company also runs digital marketing firms, healthcare information companies, and financial data platforms that influence everything from advertising trends to hospital billing systems. Their reach is vast, subtle, and embedded in industries far beyond print. But what makes the Hearsts truly formidable is their ability to blend legacy with adaptability. The company is structured so that the family retains power through a trust, while hired executives run day-to-day operations. This hybrid model allows them to scale while keeping the family name behind every move. The family fortune is estimated to exceed $25 billion, spread across multiple generations. Many Hearst heirs live lives of art, philanthropy, and fashion, but behind the scenes, they continue to sit on boards that shape news, culture, and commerce. Their decisions influence what people read, watch, and believe. It's not just media, it's narrative control. And while they no longer dominate headlines like in the yellow journalism days, the Hearsts still help shape which headlines get written. But if the Hearsts built empires from words, the next family built one from data, commerce, and algorithms, starting with one man who became the richest person in the world almost overnight. 3. The Rothschild family. The Rothschild family is the original symbol of global wealth and secrecy. Emerging in the 18th century with Meyer Amschel Rothschild in Frankfurt, they built a banking empire that spanned London, Paris, Vienna, and Naples, influencing the financial direction of Europe and funding entire governments during war. By the 1800s, they were the world's richest family, shaping international finance through government bonds, gold reserves, and private banking networks. Though much of their modern-day operations are fragmented across descendants, the Rothschilds still control Rothschild & Company, one of the most powerful financial advisory firms in the world. They advise governments, multinational corporations, and billionaires on mergers, acquisitions, and sovereign wealth management. Despite centuries of influence, they've largely stayed out of public view, leading to persistent rumors and conspiracy theories about their reach. Critics claim the family's financial influence touches everything from central banks to international policy groups, although most modern Rothschilds are involved in private banking, wine production, and philanthropy. Still, the idea of a family that once dictated interest rates and funded wars through handwritten letters is not entirely myth. At one point, they had more money than entire empires. Today, their collective wealth is estimated in the hundreds of billions, obscured by trusts, private holdings, and offshore entities. They are the blueprint for dynastic secrecy. Quiet boardroom deals, generational wealth transfers, and institutional memory that spans centuries. The Rothschilds don't need to be loud. Their power was built before the modern media, and it endures precisely because it stayed in the shadows. But even their global roots and influence couldn't match the aggressive, modern political engineering of the final two families on this list. 2. The Rockefeller family. In the early 1900s, one name towered over every industry in America: Rockefeller. The family's patriarch, John D. Rockefeller, didn't just get rich, he became the richest man in modern history, with a fortune adjusted for inflation that would be worth over $400 billion today. His company, Standard Oil at its peak, controlled more than 90% of US oil production and distribution. That kind of control wasn't just economic, it was structural, political, global. The government eventually broke up Standard Oil under antitrust laws, but the pieces only made the family richer. ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Conoco, some of the biggest oil giants today, trace their lineage directly to Rockefeller money, and while their corporate names slowly vanished from public headlines, the family's real influence went underground. The Rockefellers transitioned from oil tycoons to global power brokers. They built an empire of foundations, non-profits, investment vehicles, and private trusts. The Rockefeller Foundation, founded in 1913, became one of the most powerful philanthropic organizations in the world, shaping education, public health, and foreign aid policy. The foundation helped fund everything from the Green Revolution to the early development of the World Health Organization. Then came land. The Rockefellers quietly acquired hundreds of thousands of acres of prime real estate across the US, from New York to Hawaii. They helped design and fund Manhattan's iconic Rockefeller Center, still one of the most valuable commercial properties in America. They own ski resorts, ranches, and even tracts of protected wilderness, managed under conservation easements that still generate revenue. The family also burrowed deep into finance. Chase Manhattan Bank, once led by David Rockefeller, merged into what is now J.P. Morgan Chase, one of the most influential banks on the planet. David, until his death in 2017, was considered the last true American oligarch, a man who dined with heads of state, advised presidents, and sat at the center of global elite forums like the Trilateral Commission and Bilderberg Group. Over the decades, the Rockefellers carefully removed themselves from public scandal, emerging as intellectuals, philanthropists, and quiet fixers. Yet their foundations have been accused of influencing global policy under the guise of charity, and critics often point to their ties to institutions like the Council on Foreign Relations, which many view as an elite policy-shaping machine. Today, the family is not as centralized as it once was. Wealth spread across hundreds of descendants, but their influence persists through layers of well-funded legacy institutions. Their fortune is now estimated at $11 to $20 billion, but their control far exceeds dollar signs. They don't need headlines. They have universities, global policy chairs, energy portfolios, and entire political generations shaped by their ideas. The Rockefellers wrote the manual on turning extreme wealth into global reach, but even they never directly engineered a presidency. That role belonged to someone else, because the next family didn't just donate to politics, they allegedly installed a president. 1. The Mercer family. While some families inherited their power over generations, the Mercers built theirs like a weapon, fast, sharp, and dangerously effective. Unlike the Rockefellers or the Waltons, they didn't grow their wealth through consumer empires or real estate portfolios, and they didn't use that wealth to fund hospitals, libraries, or universities. Instead, the Mercer family chose something far more explosive. They set out to engineer the American political landscape in their image. At the center of this quiet dynasty is Robert Mercer, a former computer scientist and hedge fund executive who co-led Renaissance Technologies, a firm so secretive and successful that it's considered the gold standard of quantitative investing. Mercer wasn't just rich, he was algorithmically rich, having helped pioneer predictive trading models that routinely delivered double-digit returns year after year. His understanding of data wasn't emotional, it was forensic, cold, absolute. That same mindset soon spilled into politics. In the early 2010s, Robert and his daughter Rebecca Mercer began moving money into causes most billionaires wouldn't touch: anti-establishment movements, right-wing media, and psychological profiling. Their rise coincided with a growing wave of populist sentiment in America, but the Mercers didn't just ride the wave. They built the surfboard. They became early financiers of Breitbart News, the once fringe media outlet that would grow into a digital megaphone for the far right, thanks largely to the family's funding. Under their influence, Breitbart evolved from a niche conservative platform into a full-scale culture war engine, one that could amplify scandals, discredit political opponents, and control narratives faster than any traditional outlet. But the Mercers weren't just interested in headlines, they were interested in behavioral control. That's where Cambridge Analytica came in. The family poured at least $15 million into the company, which pitched itself as a revolutionary political data firm. Its real innovation: weaponizing psychological data. Through a loophole in Facebook's API, Cambridge Analytica harvested detailed profiles of up to 87 million users, building psychological maps that could predict, influence, and exploit voter behavior with eerie precision. The result wasn't traditional campaigning, it was digital manipulation at scale. Voters weren't just shown ads, they were triggered, agitated, radicalized, often without knowing who was behind the message or why they were seeing it. This wasn't politics as usual, this was psychological warfare dressed up as social media strategy. And at the center of it all were the Mercers. When Donald Trump's 2016 campaign began floundering, it was Rebecca Mercer who stepped in, not just as a donor, but as a power broker. She allegedly pushed for the removal of Paul Manafort and the hiring of Steve Bannon as chief strategist and Kellyanne Conway as campaign manager. Both were longtime Mercer allies. Within weeks, the campaign's tone shifted, from scattered to surgical, from reactive to ruthless. It worked. Trump won, stunning political analysts, media elites, and even his own party. But the data trail pointed not just to strategy, but to a network of coordinated digital influence, targeting key swing voters in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, using emotional cues crafted from behavioral models Cambridge Analytica built with Mercer funding. Even after Trump took office, the family's influence continued behind closed doors. Rebecca Mercer joined Trump's transition team, shaping cabinet picks and staffing decisions. At one point, she held access to multiple members of the administration and was reportedly in constant contact with top aides. Yet her name rarely appeared in headlines. That was no accident. The Mercers thrive on the concept of invisible architecture: influence without exposure, control without accountability. While other donors host public fundraisers, Rebecca works through private salons, encrypted chats, and personal meetings with power brokers. She has backed voter ID laws, supported gerrymandering efforts, and helped fund the Federalist Society, which has been instrumental in shaping the federal judiciary. In 2020, as social media platforms began cracking down on political misinformation, the Mercers helped launch Parler, a right-wing alternative to Twitter that promoted free speech, while becoming a haven for conspiracy theories, election denialism, and extremist rhetoric. Rebecca Mercer was not just a financial backer, she was a co-founder, deeply involved in its strategic direction. Their financial ecosystem stretches further still. The Mercers have funneled money through dozens of dark money groups, shell nonprofits, and tax-exempt political action committees. Many are designed to look grassroots, but are actually astroturfed networks that coordinate messaging across media, law, and lobbying. And while the Trump era may seem like their high point, it may only be a chapter. Sources close to conservative donor circles suggest the Mercers are recalibrating, reinvesting in AI-driven campaign tools, anonymous political forums, and crypto-based donor ecosystems that could bypass traditional finance rules altogether. For all their influence, the Mercers rarely speak in public. Robert is almost entirely reclusive. Rebecca has never held elected office, never published a memoir, and almost never gives interviews. But she doesn't need to. She's on the boards that matter, in the rooms that decide things, and her fingerprints are on a generation of political messaging designed not just to persuade, but to fracture, inflame, and hardwire loyalty.